All right. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Legal Considerations for Nonprofits and Social Enterprise webinar. This is in partnership with the Financial Futures Programs at CVOEO and the Vermont Law and Graduate School. Next slide, please. Just a bit of housekeeping. I'll keep the recording on throughout so that folks can watch this after the fact and refer to it for however much time in the future as they'd like to. We ask you to mute yourself when you're not speaking and to make sure that your names show in the Zoom window, which it looks like they are. Please enter your questions into the chat. Rachel and I will be monitoring that and making sure they get answered. And after the workshop, expect to receive contact information for our program, as well as Vermont Law and Graduate School, links to other resources that we bring up, and a copy of this presentation. And I'd like to pass it over to our program director, Rachel Goldstein.
Hi, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Before we move forward, I just wanted to give you a small overview of our program. We are the Microbusiness Development Program at CVOEO. We are one of 5 programs across the state offering this support to low to moderate income Vermonters free of charge. Our goal is to help you start, grow, expand your business by providing one-on-one counseling, as well as workshops such as this one today. You'll see the names of our business coaches at the bottom of this screen. And as Sophia mentioned, you'll be receiving contact information after this presentation. Next slide. We do partner with quite a few folks, and I wanted to make note of some of our sponsors, so thank you. Next slide. More partners. Thank you. Here are the regional contact for the state, because as I mentioned, we are one of 5. We are CVOEO. We work with Addison, Chittenden, Franklin, and Grand Isle counties. If you live or work outside of our region, there are supports for you. So I just wanted to make note of those. But again, you will be receiving this information after the presentation. And I think that's my last slide, but we can move forward. Nope, that was not. Additional supports. Next slide. All right. Well, thank you to Vermont Law and Graduate School for being here today. I will pass it over to Sean and Oliver to take it from here.
Great, thank you so much. I'm Oliver Goodenough. I'm a research professor at Vermont Law School and Law and Business School. That's Law and Graduate School. My apologies. Get my institution correct. And Sean Brownstein is a student and a colleague in our program, and we're going to be sharing the presentation today. I see we are a smallish crowd today, which is great. Please feel free to interrupt with questions. We're going to have a moderately formal presentation for the next 40 minutes or so, probably lasting, but we'll have plenty of time for questions after that as well. We're happy to engage with your individual questions. Also happy to be interrupted, as I said, either through the chat, which I believe Rachel will be monitoring, and then or through raising your hand, and we can talk directly as well. It's a small group. We can do that. The agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what is social enterprise as a kind of alternative to classic business style enterprise. And then we're going to look at 2 particular baskets of possibilities for structuring that. The first is going to be nonprofits. What does a nonprofit look like, and how do we deal with a nonprofit? And secondly, some of the alternative, what are sometimes called hybrid structures, which are these business and enterprise forms that sit a little bit between the classic corporation or LLC and the classic nonprofit, in that kind of space in between, where people are interested in doing good and also maybe making a little money at the same time. Next slide. Starting point is, what is enterprise? Because in some ways, talking about business or talking about a nonprofit is a bit conceptually limiting. One of the ways to think about it is an enterprise is a project or undertaking, typically one that is difficult or requires effort. And that describes a great deal of what we want to try and do as entrepreneurs, as folks getting something going. A great deal of the sort of early business or early nonprofit kind of approach is, hey, I got an idea, I got something I want to deliver to the world. It's going to be great. It's going to help people out. It's going to maybe make me a little money. Some mixture of all of that. So entrepreneurs, the people driving enterprise, typically put the pieces together. They find the people, they find the funding, they get the resources put together. Their job is to put everybody together, manage it a little bit, and get it going on the right path, and figure out how to deliver that cool service or the product or whatever it may be. And they classically look to the law as a place where the structures within which that effort can take place in a reliable way. Classic business corporation, we issue stock, we get money, we have officers, we have directors, we have shareholders, we have employees. There's all a set of ways to structure this stuff to have that joint effort go forward. In a nonprofit, the other traditional pole, it is the whole notion is that we are going to do this for a charitable purpose, for some kind of educational or charitable or religious or other recognized purpose of the IRS, and we're going to put aside, as you're going to hear from Sean more, the notion of private inurement of benefit. This, yeah, we can take a reasonable salary, but that's not where we're in this. But many of us actually, have carry both of those goals with us simultaneously, and I don't think that's a terrible thing. We want to make some money, we want to help people out, we want to do both. How do we do that in a world that's sort of these two poles of traditional viewing of the world? And what we're going to explore in the second half really here is what are some of the hybrids in between those two as we go forward. But we'll also take a look at how nonprofits can be put to use. If we don't want to be that traditional business, what are our toolkits that are available? Next slide, please. We have here a table that was put together by one of our students, graduated a year ago in 23. It's a table that shows that there are these different possibilities of business forms. We've got on the classic business side, we've got sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability, company, and corporation. But moving down from there, we have co-ops, we have benefit corporations, we have nonprofits. And it's this set of the table that we're going to be exploring today. Next slide, please. So, are we going to go profit or nonprofit? Well, it depends on goals. First off, think about your goals. Is it personal selfish considerations versus the social altruistic considerations? And as we said, these are not necessarily incompatible. We're able often to do well by doing good, as some people sometimes put it. But I think it's worthwhile considering that enterprise isn't just about classic business. It has these other components to it, and these other components, when we recognize them and try and work with them, are there. So what are ties in with the purpose discussion we'll follow? Does a social goal predominate? Does a charitable goal predominate? In which case, then maybe a nonprofit. If a social goal predominates, maybe a benefit corp or something along that line. We're going to see that there are these different ways. So first of all, really find the goal. Secondly, find the funding types, because each of these structures is tied to a classic way of funding an enterprise. The classic for-profit enterprise, we find in either we bootstrap it a bit, or we find investors, and those investors are typically interested in probably in doing some good through the enterprise, but also very much motivated by return, by how much is it going to make me in return. And on the other hand, we can have in a classic nonprofit, we have gifts and grants. These are much more, hey, I want something good to happen. I don't care about getting my money back. Here we go. And in between that a bit is loans, because nonprofits can take out loans as well as for-profits. The question is, somebody's renting you some money, and those loans can work in either direction. And again, we find a current practice is blurring the traditional lines. For-profits get crowdfunding, which won't necessarily have any return. Hey, Kickstarter kind of, can I get some money from folks just to give me effectively a kind of grant to a for-profit? That happens. We also see nonprofits increasingly interested in how the enterprise can return some money, and not just give it away all the time. But are there sources of revenue? Can Vermont Public sell sponsorships? That kind of thing. So again, these kind of mixture and blurring of the traditional lines. And then finally, a big question is governance. How will it be run? Because if it's going to be employee related, hey, we got some options for that. If it's going to be more managed by an entrepreneur or somebody who is just setting this all up for themselves, then there are other ways of setting up that governance. So these are some of the factors which really we need to keep in mind while we consider what kind of enterprise are we going to be. Are we going to be classic profit? We're going to be nonprofit? We're going to be somewhere in between. Next slide. We're now going to shift gears a bit, and rather than talking generally, we're going to talk about nonprofits for a bit, because some of you may have experience with nonprofits, and we apologize for repeating stuff that you may already know. But this is that we want you to fully understand some of the characteristics of a nonprofit if we make that choice to go forward. And Sean, I think you're going to take the lead on this from here on for the next little bit. I will chime in because I'm a professor and I'm pathologically needy on chiming in from time to time. But Sean, take it away.
Thanks so much, Professor. And I'm more than happy to facilitate with helping with this. So here we're going to look at what is a nonprofit. And a nonprofit, otherwise known as an NPO, sometimes you'll hear some acronyms in a lot of these business entities. It refers to an organization which typically provides social services, and it's not for making a profit to put in your pocket specifically. And you'll see a lot of that in education, health, arts and culture, and religions. And a lot of those examples rely on hospitals, schools, colleges, clubs, libraries, and other charitable institutions. And these organizations are typically granted tax exemption status. And we can go a little bit more into that. Those are your typical 501c3s and the 501c through the tax exempt status. And those contributions that are made can be tax deductible. They're not always, but they are, as long as they're properly registered with the IRS, you typically can get a nice little letter from the organization that says that contact your accountant for possible deductions. So using a nonprofit as your typical structure, there are some forms that you need to look at specifically. So there are limiting liabilities, as we talked about, typically with an entity, whether it be a corporation or an LLC. It's typically also run very much like a business. However, again, the money doesn't go in your pocket unless you're actually receiving some type of payment or a salary that has been decided by the board of directors. So again, you can receive money, you can have employees, you can also sign contracts on behalf of the actual nonprofit. And you also have the recognition and the legitimacy from the IRS of being a nonprofit. So Vermont has some specific public benefits, and there's also some private benefits, and more about that through the statutes in Vermont. Some limitations apply, just like any typical businesses. Again, money that is over in a regular business, if you have additional funds left over at the end of the year, you'll see some type of either distribution to the employees or some profit sharing. And with a nonprofit, you do not have that. That just goes back into their general fund where they continue doing the work that their purpose is looking to do. So again, the tax treatment organization itself is exempt, as long as you have that letter from the IRS saying you're exempt. And it's a great opportunity to access grants and deductible gifts that, again, you can find several different grants through foundations that can help with your purpose that you're looking to achieve. So what do the rules look like in practice itself? So typically, just like a business, you have to establish and observe your formalities. So you have to have your corporate structures, your bylaws, how you're actually going to run the corporation or the entity itself. You have your bank accounts, ownership. And I just want to clarify where it says ownership. When you're setting up a nonprofit, you personally do not own the nonprofit. So as in a business where you could be the CEO or the owner of the business, the nonprofit typically has a board and there's no ownership like there would be in a regular business. There are necessary filings, both with the state and with the federal government. So keeping your IRS documents up to up to date is really the best thing to do to keep your nonprofit status legitimate and not going into any type of deferment, basically, I guess you could say.
And we're going to go into those filings in a little bit more detail, I think, in a later slide.
Correct. Other Vermont laws to be aware of and entity rules or requirements. So employment, benefits, accommodations, workers' comp, unemployment, and also discrimination, those still apply. One of the unique things that nonprofits do have is volunteers. So you can't ask a person to volunteer at a business without providing some type of payment. For nonprofits, there are certain abilities to have certain types of volunteers. Would I recommend them using a commercial slicer? No, but within the realm of them doing some type of social work, I think that's okay. Sales and other taxes, some exemptions might apply. You need to ask your specific town and the state, and then requirements and registrations for specific industries such as childcare, hospitals, making sure you have the right credentials.
So again, just to summarize, just because it's a nonprofit and exempt from certain taxes and certain other rules, it doesn't exempt the enterprise from a lot of the normal, just everyday being an employer, running a childcare, whatever those are. Those regulations are to a large degree still going to apply.
So this is just a continuation. So 501c3 organizations have limited scope. And your purpose absolutely matters on what you're doing. And it must, what you're doing has to be specifically spelled out in the documentation that you provide to the IRS, along with your decisions and activities. Your operations, again, matter. Watch out for private inurement, self-dealing, and personal pay. So again, you can have a salary by being a nonprofit as long as it's approved by the board. But at the end of the year or the end of the day, the money that is left over doesn't go into your pocket. It goes to the nonprofit or it goes to other charitable dealings that is specific to your nonprofit.
And these provisions, these limitations are written straight into the 501c3 qualification language in the statute. So in order to qualify under C3 as a charitable nonprofit, these are the things you got to do. You got to have the right kind of purpose. It's got to meet the categories that are listed in the statute: charities, education. There are a religion. There are a few others in there as well. And then you also have to on the other side, you've got to negate the possibility of private inurement, a number of these things, as we'll see.
And then there is, sorry, go ahead, Professor.
I was just going to say also in the operations matter. So operating it consistently with this, as Sean was saying, you have to say in the documents no private inurement, and then B, you have to operate so there's no private inurement. You have to both state that as the purposes and then follow that in your operations.
Yes. And there is the potential to convert, if you're currently in a business structure for profit, there is the ability to convert to a nonprofit or nonprofit into a business. However, it is extremely tricky and there are a lot of hoops to go through, but there is potential of doing that. So for a profit to a nonprofit, you need to look at what your successor and your disclosure and rules are. So if you're going from I'm making money at the end of the day to I'm going to convert this into a nonprofit, at the end of the day, if you were to shut down, the money needs to go to a like cause. So if you're a hospital of some sort where you're doing state-of-the-art surgeries, you would also want to look at other hospitals that are in similar in the similar field as you to pass on those additional monies that you have within there. And then from a nonprofit to a for-profit, you're winding up restrictions. What happens at the end of the day? Does it go to the board of directors? Do they determine who the CEO is of the corporation, and so forth? And again, private endearment is always lurking. They want to know where the money goes at the end of the day. Is it going into your pocket, or is it going into the nonprofit's purpose and its mission?
Yeah, Sean, if I could elaborate just a little bit. Sometimes people get going in a nonprofit and say, "Oh, gee, this should be a for-profit." Sometimes they go in a for-profit and say, "Yikes, we need to get grant funding, etc." This really is a nonprofit. The key element here is the IRS will scrutinize that transition to make sure that it's not a pretense for bailing out a failing for-profit, or for putting the charitable assets into the hands of the managers. So arm's length aspects of this are important. Making sure that any transactions between the two are fair, fairly compensated, and that the charitably dedicated assets end up going to charity and not going into someone's private pocket. That's the private endearment is always the lurking piece.
So here's just a very brief overview of applying and reporting rules. If you were interested in a nonprofit, you would have to do a application to the IRS, and that documentation there's two different types. There's the 1023 or the 1023 EZ. And it goes through on how much money or how much revenue is the nonprofit going to be looking at. Is it under 50,000 a year? Is it under 250,000? Is it over 3 million? So it would depend on what you're going to be looking to project. It is extremely detailed and picky. And I use the word picky specifically because it really wants to know, the IRS wants to know what you're doing with the funds, what you're doing, what type of education are you providing to the public, what type of social atmosphere are you providing? And that goes into specifics on the long form that they do have. If I recall, when I looked at it last, I think it was 10 pages, which it also then goes into, it wants to copy your bylaws. It wants to know where everything's going again. And then each year, I believe it's the Form 990. So that's your taxes that you would be providing. So just like any other type of business, a nonprofit also is required to file a tax return with the IRS to ensure that you are following the rules set forth with your nonprofit status, where the funds are going. Have you done anything that is outside of what you said you were going to be doing to ensure that you can continue your nonprofit status? And then you always need to remember, if your state has any type of tax return, I believe Vermont does have tax returns that you do have to file. You also have to do state taxes and any type of filing fees that are required with the state as well.
I should mention that in some states, New York, for instance, in addition to the tax filing, there's oversight by the charity division of the Attorney General's office, and there's a whole set of additional filings there. Vermont, I believe, does not have that. Although the AG's office does have jurisdiction, I don't believe that they require a separate filing, as would be the case in New York. And I should just to reiterate what Sean was saying, that the 1023 is a bit of a bear, and basically the people organizing the nonprofit have to make a very convincing and detailed case to the IRS on why A, it is a nonprofit, what kind it is, et cetera, et cetera. This is a place, by the way, where a bit of legal help sometimes is handy if folks doing this are not used to that kind of detailed, picky, responsive filing.
And so if you're interested in a nonprofit, where do you start? And before starting, just as we mentioned with any other business, you want to provide what exactly is your purpose and what's your mission. Look to see if it's something that is more social, that you want to have the welfare of the community to be able to utilize, or is it something where at the end of the day, you're looking to generate your own additional wealth, essentially. So gather your information and do a spreadsheet, have pros, have cons, look at it and see what is going to be the better choice to make. And if it's a nonprofit, you're going to fill out your 1023. You're going to look each year to have your 990 set in as early as possible. And it's highly recommended to have an accountant and lawyer on the team in the same room while doing these things. Many times, many times, and we joke about this in our clinic, is it's really important to get an accountant and an attorney in the room at the same time, because sometimes you're playing this game where the accountant will say you really should talk to a lawyer about that, and the lawyer's really good at pretty much say, well, anything financial, it really should go through the accountant.
And I would say that, however, in this day of electronic communication, the same room could be the chat room on a Zoom or a Teams call. So it is a principal thing. But as Sean is saying, if you can get that communication flowing back and forth, often you can shortcut a lot of problems back and forth. I should mention, by the way, this isn't necessarily cheap. Lawyers don't come cheap. Accountants don't come cheap. I say that as a general rule. Sometimes one can negotiate a pro bono representation, or what's sometimes called a low bono representation, where people lawyers or accountants are reducing their fees a bit for the nonprofit. Sometimes people put a lawyer on the board of the nonprofit and then hope to get free legal advice from them. That can be useful up to a point. Expertise in nonprofit work is very useful on some of this, and a general lawyer can get that expertise, but starting with someone who has it is a good way. I should mention also in this context that the Vermont Law and Graduate Schools program here that we're representing can sometimes make a referral to the Bar Association, which then can provide up to 10 hours of subsidized legal fees, essentially free with certain lawyers who are willing to take a low bono fee with respect to that work. So again, if there are folks who are interested in that, make sure that you stay in communication with us or get in communication with us about how that accessing that up to 10 hours is a possibility.
All right, Professor, I hand this back over to you at this time.
Okay, let me talk a bit about hybrids, because as you can see, the nonprofit, the classic nonprofit, the classic charitable nonprofit under 501c3 is a way of structuring enterprise that has some opportunities open up, getting grants and contributions and having that tax status, but some things also shut down the ability to actually share in the profitability of a successful enterprise if it goes forward. So there are pluses and minuses to that. By the way, I should also mention that in addition to 501c3, there is 501c4, 5, 6, 7. There are 25 or more of these different categories of tax exemption. But it's really 501c3 has the ability to then have deductible contributions made to it. Most of the rest of those, the contributions would not be deductible unless it was for some direct business purpose that somebody was doing. So again, 501c3 nonprofit is out there. Other things exist. And the principal categories we're going to talk about today are the low profit limited liability companies, sometimes called the L3C. That is, as we'll see, is something that is often I got a little more hype about it than I think the reality may be. We're going to talk about benefit corps, which and also B corps. B corps are not the same as benefit corps, as we'll see in a little bit. They're related concepts, but they're not the same necessarily. And we're going to talk about co-ops a bit, consumer, worker, and producer co-ops. Next slide. Okay, the L3C, what it is and isn't. The L3C is a kind of LLC, a limited liability company, which is one of the classic for-profit structures that we can use. And there is in Vermont and some other states a specific subset of the LLC called the low profit limited liability company, often then abbreviated L3C. And what the L3C is it was designed to fit a very particular requirement of a large private foundations when they in their giving. The rules for large private foundations, which is not a public charity, but what's called a private foundation, state that they may not make certain kinds of investments. And those investments typically would mean they could not invest in a company, even if it was if that investment was to some degree program related. If you jump through the requirements of certain kinds of program-related investments, however, the IRS permits these private foundations to make a profitable investment. And the rules on that say that the enterprise that they're investing in can make a profit, but that profit making has to be secondary to doing things which are related to a nonprofit purpose. So what you end up with the L3C is saying our purpose is this kind of charitable purpose. But unlike the classic the nonprofit, which goes on to say that nobody can make any money, it says we can make some money, but that has to be a almost accidental. It has to be a very secondary purpose to the purpose of fulfilling the charitable purpose. That would not in itself be eligible for 501c3 treatment. Why? Because it is not subject to that, because we have the private endowment piece. We can take some money out of it if that happens to be what happens. But it does say that it's going to basically devote itself to these other purposes. That does qualify it for these kinds of program-related investments by a private foundation. So if a for-profit enterprise anticipates that it's going to be looking to work with a private foundation as an investor, the L3C is tailor-made for that. It's absolutely made for that. Some people try and stretch it into a general purpose vehicle, and it can be, but it's really not meant to be because of this weird thing of the limitation on the purposes. It's not just any old social enterprise, but you got to really say, hey, I'm going to run it like a nonprofit, except for the fact that I get to take the money home at the end of the day. And that is constraining in a way that many enterprises in this social enterprise space don't necessarily want to go all of that way towards. So that means it's probably not a general purpose vehicle. There's more information here on the registration, et cetera. The Secretary of State's office has some further information. If people are interested in this, again, our program can provide further education on it. But it is, again, one of those things that if you're looking for that private foundation program-related investment, it's perfect. That's what it was designed for. Any other purpose, maybe not. Next slide, please. By the way, if people have questions, we hit these, please. Where I'm a professor. I'm happy to keep talking, but if you've got questions, please feel free to interrupt. Also on this spectrum of hybrid enterprises, hybrid entities, is the benefit corporation, and the benefit corporation typically has a bit broader application than the L3C. The benefit corporation is basically a subset of a regular corporation. You have shareholders, you have officers, you have directors, you have the normal structures. But in addition to that, you're allowed to have broader purposes. You're expressly authorized to have purposes that say, hey, I'm not just making money, I'm also going to do a social benefit. There is some law, probably not fully accurate, but some law out there that suggests that a classic corporation really should prioritize just making money. That's what, Gordon Gekko kind of style. Greed is good, just make money. That's what we're here for. The benefit corporation expressly says, no, we can have two purposes. We can have making some money, and we can have pursuing this social good as well. So one of the things that in a benefit corporation is that social good gets laid out in its organizational documents, in its articles or certificate of incorporation. That good then, how do we keep ourselves honest on that? And the classic benefit corporation law, particularly the one of Vermont, says that we'll have a benefit director. There's a director who's going to be looking after this thing, and maybe a benefit officer. We're going to have reports. There's going to be an annual report. The benefit director is going to be involved in this report to the shareholders and to the board, saying, hey, here's how we're doing. Here's our benefit goal. How are we doing? There is, however, no liability for failure to do it. You can the report can say, hey, we did a really bad job this year. We made some money, but we didn't really get the social enterprise. We didn't reduce carbon emissions. We didn't do these other things. Shame on us. There isn't actual liability for that. There's no enforceable obligation to meet your social benefit, but it's a permission, and then there is this kind of you got to be honest about how you're doing, and that is the way that benefit corporations keep themselves on that purpose. Again, there's a statutory basis for all of this. We've got a link to that. It is one of those areas where again a lawyer can be helpful if you want to do that. Structure, as I say, looks a lot like a regular corporation, bylaws, all those things. What it does do is it gives you the power and then the conscience around a social benefit purpose. By the way, taxation of these is just like taxation of anything else and any other normal corporation. Related to, but different from being a benefit corporation, is getting certified as a B corporation, being a certified B corporation. And that is different because the benefit corporation is the legal status. The certified B corporation is just a good conduct badge, a gold star from the B Corp organization, which is a private initiative that is out there to sort of audit and keep track of, hey, are you meeting that double or triple bottom line of doing well, doing good, and maybe protecting the environment as you go and do all of that. There's a link there to bcorporation.net. They have a bunch of procedures. There's a lot of Vermont companies that have gotten B Corp certification. It's terrific. It supplements that conscience that I talked about above on the benefit corporation. This is a way of getting an outsider to come in and say, yeah, they're doing a good job. They're meeting those requirements. It also, quite frankly, can be useful in terms of creating a brand of social enterprise, which can be a useful thing. Folks may want to deal with certified B Corps, and unlike the benefit corporation, where again it's iffy whether the goal is actually being met, the certification from the outside of the B Corp gives an outside validation that people can rely on to a significant degree. Next slide. Cooperatives. Oh, cooperatives. We could have an entire talk on cooperatives, but at least let me give you an introduction here. The notion of a cooperative is that people who have a mutual interest in some kind of benefit from an enterprise can come together and form a company, form an enterprise that is going to be different from the classic corporation in that the owners in effect become its members, become these collaborating members who have this shared goal of benefit. And the classic ways in which those are structured are around three categories. One of them is a supplier co-op. A supplier co-op, Agrimart, is a supplier co-op. It is the successor to the co-op, to the Cabot co-op, which is basically you got to be a dairy farmer to be part of it. It's a supplier. It's suppliers of milk. The suppliers of milk get together. They can build processing plants together. They can do all these things that together benefit them as individual suppliers, but then they sell on to that and go forward. So again, that's one form of co-op. Second form of co-op is a workers co-op, where the shared benefit enterprise. We're going to be workers of it. We're going to be rather than having the capitalists in effect be the owners, the workers are going to be the owners. And this is a vehicle through which workers can share ownership in an enterprise of some kind. And the third category is consumer co-ops. And consumer co-ops are where the shared benefit is, hey, we're all buyers of stuff. We want to have a co-op that we do that. Again, they're lively co-ops of this kind in our area. There's a South Royalton where the law school has a co-op. Down here in the Upper Valley, the Hanover co-op is a well-known possibility. There's a White River co-op as well. There's some wonderful co-ops on the retail side, on this consumer side. I should mention, by the way, on the workers' own co-ops, there are a number throughout the state as well. And if you're interested in employee ownership, I should point out that down at the bottom of this slide is the VEOC, which is an organization, very capable organization that is full of information on employee ownership possibilities, on how to structure them, what they do, et cetera. If folks are interested in this, they're a very good place to go. But to go back to cooperatives, the governance is a bit like a corporation. There are boards, there are elections, but instead of shareholders, it's the members who take charge of it at all. And another interesting piece in this is the special tax treatment, because the co-op typically benefits from a special tax treatment, which allows the payment of membership shares of dividends back to the members, but then allows the company to deduct them, so that the double taxation problem that you see in many classic C corporation setups is largely avoided if one can qualify for this special tax treatment through being a co-op. Again, the co-op can make profit. It's allowed to make profit, but again, it's aimed at not giving that profit not to a capitalist, but giving that profit back to its members to share in as they go forward. Other employee ownership, there's the ESOP form. We're not going to go into detail on that. It's a way of employees buying out basically an existing company, and it has a lot of tax benefits. Again, if people are interested in employee ownership, please come talk to us. Please talk to the VEOC folks. There's a lot of detail in there that we'd be happy to help explore. Next slide. So, concerns and recaps. Social enterprise concerns. Again, to go back to sort of goal questions here. What are our concerns as we go forward? Branding. Are we looking to brand to do a social enterprise because we want to have the benefits of branding that to the outside world? Again, the B Corp certification is a good way to do that. Some of these other ways setting it up can be done, but again, that's something to keep in mind. Purpose specification. What is that social purpose, and how are we going to specify that? The B Corp makes that possible to do that kind of specification. That can be quite useful. It's not as thorough as the purpose specification in a 501c3, but it's there, and it's something that folks can look at and take some comfort in. Purpose continuity. Is this going to stay the purpose of the company? Ben and Jerry's started out by Ben and Jerry and had a very strong social mission, and then it gets bought by Unilever of all things, and Unilever makes a commitment to that social mission, and are we still doing it or not? It's an interesting question. How do we have that purpose continuity in a company, in an enterprise, as it matures and changes? Fiduciary duties around the purpose, as we mentioned, are the directors obligated to do around that purpose? Again, in a B Corp, not really obligated. Benefit Corp, not really obligated. In a B Corp, they're going to look at it, and their certification could go away. In a co-op, again, a lot of fiduciary duties there to benefit their membership, which is where we go. So profit and private benefit are possible in these hybrids, again, subject to some limitations. So what are we going to choose? Well, again, we go back to the beginning, but what's the purposes? What's the funding? What's the governance? How is that all going to come together? Does a nonprofit or do these hybrids better map onto the goals of the entrepreneur and the founders, and then the folks who are going to continue it, than the classic for-profit structure? And if so, then these should be thought about. So what to choose, how to set up and run it. Once you set up this way, then running it has to be consistent with how it's been set up. So how do we advise as a lawyer in all this? If I were actually advising folks, I would try to sit down with them and say, hey, what is your goal? What's your purpose? Where you're funding? What is all that kind of coming from? Again, those factors that we've seen before. Next slide. So final considerations. As we hope we haven't completely shut your brains down with our detail here, but legal structure is important. One of the key takeaways is the legal structure matters because it enables or inhibits what you can do in these contexts. There are many types to consider. Within for-profit, there are partnerships, there are LLCs, there are corporations. Within these hybrids, there's these hybrid forms to consider. There's the nonprofit form. The rules governing nonprofits are particularly picky. That's a take-home. They really do want you to qualify and operate yourself within their very, very constraining rules. And again, finally, business goals and social impact can guide this decision. Questions? You're ready to receive questions. Back to Sean, why don't you unshare for the moment? I think we can. Unless is there another slide? Oh, there we go. Sorry. Before we do that, as I mentioned, if you need legal services, you can submit an inquiry. The Vermont Law and Graduate Schools programs that we are part of can provide an educational consultation, one where we provide more background of the kind we're doing here. There is this possibility of getting up to 10 hours paid legal services from an attorney. We can get you helpful materials and legal resources, and we do group educational presentations by request. Here we are with the CVOEO, and we're doing exactly that. If you're interested in that kind of thing for other organizations, we work with other organizations as well. And now I think we're ready for our questions. Is that right, Sean? That's Ann. Okay, cool. Any thoughts or questions? I turn it back over to Rachel and Sophia to help lead on anything.
Yeah, folks can throw their questions in the chat, or they can just unmute themselves and ask directly.
Yeah, we'd be happy. We've got a fair bit of time still. We'd be happy to have a conversation with folks.
Hey, this is Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. How you doing?
How you doing, Oliver?
Good to see you.
You as well. So I am involved in a number of conversations around the Vermont blockchain law
Yes.
and conversations around the personal information protection company concept using fiduciary responsibility around data as
Right.
a way to bring certain services to market that don't always appear to have a super high profit potential,
Right.
but finding where they fit. And so I'm curious, what maybe you see in action. I know there's limited, only about 90 or so organizations registered under that BBLLC. And I'm curious where you see some fit in utilizing that or interest in utilizing that alongside with the and the employee ownership models to streamline the compliance and the certification that we are actually in a B Corp model, say, meeting the goals that we're setting.
Oh, Ryan, you are touching something close to my heart, as you know. One of the things that Vermont has done is more specialized forms for entity creation is something called the BBLLC, which is a format which is I won't say that any longer unique to Vermont because Wyoming has jumped on board as well and has imitated us, and a couple other states as well. But it's essentially saying an LLC can be set up to run virtually, and not only virtually, but virtually in connection with blockchain as the way that it organizes and manages itself. There is a branch of thinking around blockchains that goes to DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, which are essentially the idea that hey, just a bunch of people are going to come together and we're gonna do something on the chain and it's going to be cool and we'll do it. The problem with that is that the legacy legal system tends to recognize that as being something else, like a partnership or something you don't want to be. So Vermont has this possibility of being a BBLLC, which is intended to give structure to a blockchain enterprise. He also mentioned these personal protection, personal information protection companies, and they are set up to provide a set of opt-ins fiduciary duties where you can set it up as a regular company, but opt-in fiduciary duties that give extra protections with respect to data protection and retention. Both of those, the BBLLC is there and runs is itself the PIPC is set up basically any company form would be there. In both cases, it might be useful if there is a social benefit involved to seek B Corp certification. And that B Corp certification may or may not be available depending on what it's up to. I have to admit, I have not seen a DAO go for B Corp certification. Ryan, you would probably know more than I in that. Have you seen a DAO try to be a B Corp?
I have not, though I do encourage it.
Okay, I'd be interesting to see whether when we've got an example of something that can do that.
So actually, it's interesting. So I can cite a registered entity. I believe it might be expired. I've been talking to them about re-registering. They're registered as a BBLLC, and it's called Web3 I Am. What's really interesting is they're sort of a self-starter, do it DIY, and they do a little guidance. But what they've done is what they're doing is really for public benefit. What they've done is they own or have identified Fortune 100 identities on chain or online. So whether it's URLs, domains, things like that, and they've aggregated like a source of verification. So in other words, if someone tried to use Walmart's name to conduct some kind of scam against people, his service would allow them a really easy way to check
all that. Very cool. Ryan, here's a scoop. I think we're getting a little in the weeds on specifics. Why don't you get in touch, if you don't mind getting in touch with our program at VLGS? It would be great to set up a separate consultation on this, if you will.
And that's what I was going to pull it right back out of the weeds real quick. Is again just looking for that direction. So him and others would I direct them to the Vermont
You
Law
can
School?
happy to
Because
direct them
LGS?
to us, but again, you might actually have a little bit of a consultation with us first, and we can examine some of that and see where that might work out well.
Sure. Yeah, sounds
That would
good.
be great. The web link is there. I know. Be in touch and make sure you reference the fact that we've already started the conversation.
Excellent, excellent.
Okay,
And,
no,
and
thank
my other question then
Yeah.
would come into where that plays in, talking about identity, security, the risk mitigation, and perceived risk of all that, and Vermont being a leader in captive insurance. And
Yes.
so I'm curious if you could articulate a little bit about the different entities that might be utilized in a captive and where that opportunity is to bring attention to Vermont to really work with the regulators and work with the innovation that we have.
Another important but also to some degree detailed subject matter. For the benefit of everybody here who may not know about it, insurance can be done either by buying insurance from a separate established company, and then that established company often enters in what's called the reinsurance market and basically sells off a chunk of that risk. They keep a little sliver of profitability in there. That's why they're doing it. But essentially, their capacity to insure is smaller companies is often limited. Even big companies, they want to share that risk around. And there are companies which are called the reinsurance companies. A number of them based in Europe, Munich Re, Swiss Re. There's a bunch of companies that do that reinsurance step. Either a large company or an affiliated group, in some ways, in this way, is not unlike a co-op, but an affiliated group can come together and create what's called a captive insurance. And what they do is that affiliated group basically sets up its own insurance company. And that insurance company gathers the risk from around and may keep some of it in itself, but often then uses it as a mechanism to access the reinsurance market directly and effectively cutting out the profitability of that that entry level insurance company that was going to otherwise write your policy and then turn around and maybe sell it to a reinsurer. So what it really does is it allows the profitability of the entry level insurance company to be taken back by the sponsor of the captive insurance. It's called captive because it's captive of a company or it's captive of an affiliated group, such as psychotherapists in New England, come together and they have to have insurance. They can set up their own insurance company to basically be their insurer, turn around, and then work through to the reinsurance market to take at least a chunk of that risk on. Vermont is the leader in all this. Woohoo! We are the national capital of captive insurance, and our insurance people, I've dealt with them in various contexts. They're really good at all this. They're terrific about insurance, and while protecting the public, are trying to be flexible and figure out how to make it all work in a way that is great. It drops some tens of millions of dollars into the state coffer in terms of taxes every year. We like it. How entities fit with that is typically the captive insurances are seen as a classic business organization, a corporation or an LLC at this point. That said, I again, now you're getting me beyond my specific knowledge. Co-ops might be possible, and probably not a charitable LLC, but a charitable nonprofit, but one of those other nonprofits. The business league might be a possibility again. But you've just got me out over my skis now. I don't know in detail on that, and I apologize.
Well, I definitely appreciate the input on it. And my thought process in asking it is really around bringing that leadership attention to Vermont, in that there's lots of emerging technology companies looking for sandbox regulation, things like that. And my argument to them in some cases is we actually kind of have this sandbox in Vermont. You have to position your ideas and your solution in a way that fits a model of risk mitigation, and then we can start creating some really interesting opportunities.
With my more commercial hat on, I have on a couple of occasions actually participated in exactly that kind of discussion, and the Vermont people were good. Again, let's expand that conversation outside of this context. I think would be useful.
Fair enough. Yeah,
I
thank you.
anticipate that while hopefully other folks are finding this interesting, it is not the general questions about business organizations. Do any of our other participants have questions? Again, Ryan, cool, but let's follow up. Good to see you again. Other questions on these hybrid and alternate organization forms? Rachel or Sophia, anything from you folks about it? We have accomplished that professorial goal of rendering everybody mute and stunned but with information dump into. Well, let me go ahead, Rachel.
No, I was just going to share that I really enjoyed hearing, particularly your information around B corporations. I had done some work prior to this job, helping a company move in the direction of becoming B Corp certified, and it was incredible to see the amount of detail required to apply. And we actually never moved forward with it after it was like a 2-month process. And they ultimately determined it wasn't worth their while. But it was really interesting to be a part of it. And I just enjoy learning more about that model.
They really are one of those circumstances where detail and process is the substitute for conscience, in effect. They say, yes, your conscience is good, but let's detail and process is how we're going to certify that.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah, no, good point. And again, folks who are interested in B Corp, go to the website. They list the B Corps in Vermont. There's some overlap of B Corp and employee ownership of not always, but there's some. I'm wanting to say I know, for instance, I think it's at Harpoon that's the brewery that is a worker owned, and they may also be a B Corp. Anyway, there's some overlap, and same might be true of King Arthur, but again, I'm not sure. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, it looks like
why are they not good for general purpose enterprises? The reason they're not good for general purpose enterprises is that it can't be a general purpose enterprise. An L3C has to have those purposes, and those purposes are specifically need to be limited to purposes that would fit a 501c3 organization's purposes. So remember when Sean showed that list of purposes, it's got to be either education or charity or religion or hospitals or something along that line. That list of purposes is the constraining universe basically for the L3C as well. At least that's the intention, because it's intended to match up with the grant-making organization that is going to have one of those purposes. Instead of being grant, it's going to be a program-related investment making. So it has really been designed for that with that in mind. And if one starts to try and bend it to purposes outside of that, it's going to be bending, and might as well just use the regular LLC, and in the regular LLC say, here's what our purposes are, which are these more constrained, social purpose pieces. You can do that, or set up a benefit corp and structure it that way. So that's why I, at any rate, don't look to the L3C as that good for a flexibility for a more general purpose thing. Oh, great. Yes, so Vermont Business for Social Responsibility, a great organization. Thank you, Professor Reichs, for calling that to our attention. But Claire, did we get, it was Claire, I think, who raised that question on the L3C. Did we answer that adequately? Okay, great.
Yeah, I have a question about, just general startup fundraising in different ways, and how that may fit well or create conflicts with some of the,
great. Yep.
B Corp and L3C models.
Yes. The L3C would probably not be a great model for trying to raise classic investor money. Classic investors of the sort of the most identifiable being often the venture capital community, but also there are other just wealthy individuals or just even individuals who are your friends and family, or private equity funds and that kind of thing. They have a tendency to look to the classic for-profit corporations and to some degree LLC. If the enterprise is going to scale nationally and in terms of investment and activity, often the C Corp, the classic corporation, is a vehicle of choice. If it's going to stay more local and have smaller number of folks involved, often the LLC is a very useful vehicle in that kind of context. And that's the sort of thing that getting a lawyer's opinion and matching it up to the specific circumstances is quite useful. There are funds out there which are sympathetic to B Corp kind of approaches. And if you're dealing with a social enterprise style funding organization or individuals for whom that's important, then pursuing the social enterprise piece can be a help rather than a hindrance in terms of raising capital. But if you're looking at the more traditional formats, that may not be the case. More traditional funding routes. On the other hand, the social enterprise piece may open up different kinds of funding. As we've talked about the program-related investment, if it is going to be a program-related activity that could match up with the L3C purpose requirements, and there's a private foundation that's eager to make some grants or all, it's possible, hey, instead of a grant, give me a program-related investment. Why is that better? Because if we actually make money, it comes back to you. A grant you just gave away. If in this case, you're preserving some of your capital if it works. You can be an investor as well as being a funder. So again, that can work in that context. So again, back as we discussed, really imagine the purpose, imagine the sources, imagine all of this, and then match the format to that thing. If it's government grants, it may be that, hey, we've got to be a nonprofit. That's cool. That's where we're going to get our funding. Does that help?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Other thoughts or questions? Right,
Like that might be all the questions, unless folks have any final questions.
And we don't need to hang out the full time. We'd be happy to turn people loose.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation and for your time, Oliver and Sean. It was wonderful, and it'll be a useful resource that will live on our YouTube page as well, so that folks can access it then.
Great, and let me reiterate that we'd love to hear from people who would like more detail into our normal programs as well.
Absolutely, we always refer folks your way.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
Yes, thank you so much.